Story 1. He described my dreams before I had them. This happened to me in 2017, back when I was living in a small rented studio in Spokane, Washington. I was in between jobs, doing freelance web design from home and barely making ends meet. The building was old, a 4-story walk-up that used to be a hotel in the 1940s. My unit was on the 3rd floor, facing a brick wall from the adjacent building, so I didn't get much natural light. The place was always a little too quiet. I didn't sleep well that year, not because of stress. I've always had restless nights, but things changed around late November. It started with a note, folded in half and slid under my door. No envelope, just a single sentence typed out in Courier. You will dream of the man with the taped fingers. That night, I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was some kind of prank, maybe one of the other tenants being weird. I left the note on the counter and forgot about it. But I did dream that night. I dreamt of a man. His face wasn't clear, but I remember his hands, thick white tape wrapped around every finger, like old sports tape, dirt-streaked and frayed. He didn't say anything. He was just standing at the end of my bed, tapping one finger against the wall. The next morning, I remembered the note. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just a weird coincidence. The exact phrase had been used. I went downstairs and asked the landlord if he had camera footage for the hallway. He said no. The building was too old for that. I asked if anyone else had complained about strange notes. He shook his head, said most people in the building kept to themselves. The next night, I stayed up late working. I had coffee too late and ended up falling asleep around 3 a.m. Again, I dreamed. This time, it was more detailed. The man wasn't in my room. He was sitting on a plastic chair in a laundromat, the kind with coin slots and buzzing fluorescent lights. I recognized it. It was the one 4 blocks from my building. He wasn't doing laundry. He was just watching. Taped fingers resting in his lap, head tilted. He looked directly at me when I walked past in the dream. I woke up sweating. Another note came that afternoon. Same paper, same Courier font. Tomorrow, he'll be outside the green awning. Don't wave. There was a coffee shop 2 blocks away with a green awning. I went there every Thursday morning, so Thursday I went. I didn't want to. I told myself I wouldn't even look, but I did. He was there, not in a dream, a real man. Same height, same taped fingers, leaning against a mailbox across the street. He didn't wave, neither did I. I left without getting coffee. I called the police that afternoon, told them someone might be watching me, leaving notes, showing up in places I'd dreamed about. They asked if the man had made threats. He hadn't. They said they'd send a car to patrol the area for the next few days. That was it. I didn't sleep that night. The next note arrived a day later. He knows what you'll forget. That's why he waits near mirrors. I started noticing gaps in my memory. Nothing huge, just little slips. I'd open my fridge and find the light off, then remember I hadn't changed the bulb in weeks. I'd reach for my phone and realize I'd left it charging in the other room, even though I'd just used it. But the mirrors bothered me the most. I had one mirror in the apartment, in the bathroom above the sink. Every morning it looked slightly tilted, just enough to notice if you stared at the corners. I thought maybe the wall wasn't level, or the glue was failing. Then I marked the edges with small bits of masking tape. The next morning the mirror had shifted, half an inch clockwise. The tape didn't move, but the mirror did. And the camera I set up? It never recorded anything between 1:00 and 1:20 a.m., just blank footage. The file existed. It was just static. It kept happening. The dreams, the notes, the mirrored shifts. Always subtle, always just real enough. I started to feel like I wasn't the one having the dreams anymore. I was being given them, like they were placed in my head. I could feel it, the moment right before sleep when your mind drifts. There was a pull, like a hand guiding a boat into a dark channel. I stopped leaving the apartment. I stopped answering texts. I didn't trust what I might say or remember, because that's what scared me most. The dreams weren't fading. They were layering. He was building something in my sleep, and I was helping him without knowing. The mirror was the part I couldn't stop checking. Each morning, I'd measure its distance from the corner of the sink. I started marking it in pen on the tile. 12.22 meter, 12.6 cm, 11.9 cm. The numbers weren't random. They were shifting in a pattern, back and forth like a slow pendulum. No one else had keys to my unit. I'd changed the locks after the first month. Still, something was getting in, or worse, it never needed to. I bought a second mirror, a small handheld one, and placed it on my nightstand. Every night, I'd turn it face down. Every morning, it was upright, perfectly centered. I checked the windows, all locked. I put tape over the latch of the front door. The tape was never broken, but the mirror always moved. I brought this up with the landlord again. He gave me that tired look, said I was probably just sleepwalking or stressed. I asked if anyone had ever reported weird things happening in the building. He laughed and said, "You're not the first person to ask that." Then he changed the subject. I installed a second camera, this one inside the bathroom. I hid it behind a fake shampoo bottle, motion activated, completely silent. That night, I set it to record and went to bed with the mirror double taped to the wall. The next morning, it was still there, but one corner was slightly pulled away as if someone had tried to pry it. I checked the footage. Nothing. From 2:11 to 2:34 a.m., the file was intact, time-stamped, but just showed an empty room. Not static, just stillness. Like the entire apartment had stopped existing for that window of time. The next note was under my pillow. "You're doing better now." He notices. I didn't remember touching the note, but it was in my handwriting. I started locking the bathroom at night. Not for safety, but to see if I'd unlock it in my sleep. I wouldn't. And yet, I'd wake up to find condensation on the mirror, like someone had stood in front of it, breathing. Once, I left a folded towel on the sink. It was gone in the morning. I found it 3 days later inside the freezer. No one believed me. The cops were polite but indifferent. Friends stopped replying to my updates. They thought I was unraveling. Maybe I was. But if so, then why was the mirror no longer reflecting what I saw? One night, I looked at myself and noticed the bathroom behind me was wrong. Subtle things. The light flickered in the reflection, but not in real time. The shower curtain was closed, but I knew I'd left it open. I turned around, the curtain was open. I looked back in the mirror, still closed. I turned back again, and this time it was closed. The last 3 weeks were the worst. There were no new notes. That should have made things easier, but it didn't. The absence felt louder than anything. I stopped dreaming about the man. Instead, I dreamed about places I'd never been. Dark waiting rooms, sterile hallways, a basement lined with books written in languages I couldn't understand. But I always knew he had been there first, left things behind for me to find. I started waking up with impressions in my skin, the faint outline of fingers on my arm. Once, I woke with a small word written on my wrist in smudged ink. Soon, I didn't own any markers. I started speaking differently. Small shifts in vocabulary. Friends commented that I'd picked up a new cadence. More deliberate, slower. I hadn't noticed. I played a voicemail I left for my mother. I didn't recognize my own voice. One night, I found my phone unlocked and open to the Notes app. There was a list of items I don't remember typing. Milk bread, red tape, white rope, mirror glue. I deleted it. Then, 10 minutes later, it appeared again. I turned the phone off and left it on the floor. The next morning, I woke up with a typed message on my laptop. "You're almost ready." I hadn't opened the computer in 3 days. The final night, there was a knock at the door. Not loud. 3 gentle taps, spaced evenly. I didn't move. I sat still for hours. When I finally opened the door, no one was there. But a note was taped to the inside of the peephole, facing inward. "Now I'm part of your memory." That was it. Nothing after that. No more dreams, no more notes, no more shifting mirrors. The cameras recorded normally. The marks on my skin stopped appearing. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was vacancy. Because here's the thing, Sometimes, when I see my reflection in a window, not a mirror, just glass, I see something else behind my eyes, something placed there, something watching back, and I wonder if he's still designing. Story 2. I never saw his face, but I felt his breath every time I slept. This happened to me in 2018, when I was living in a basement apartment in Missoula, Montana. It was the first place I ever had entirely to myself. Technically, it was part of a duplex. The upper unit was occupied by an elderly woman who rarely left her home. We shared an entrance off the back alley, but our doors were separate. I liked the seclusion. I liked the quiet, at least at first. The apartment was narrow and low-ceilinged, with one small window above the couch that faced the alley. Most of the light came from lamps. The front door opened straight into the living room, and the bedroom was off to the right, just large enough to fit a full-size bed, a narrow dresser, and a wall-mounted mirror that was already there when I moved in. There was nothing special about the place, but I liked the simplicity. I kept things neat, almost ritualistically. I'd clean my kitchen every night before bed. The couch cushions were always arranged a certain way, the blinds always drawn the same direction. So it was strange when one morning I noticed the salt shaker had moved. It was small, a few inches maybe. I kept it tucked beside the stove, aligned with the edge of the backsplash. But that morning it was sitting diagonally, almost as if someone had used it, then forgot to put it back where it belonged. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe I'd bumped it. Maybe I was misremembering. But then it happened again. Not just the salt. My phone charger was unplugged. A drawer I always kept closed was slightly open, not enough to notice unless you were standing at the right angle. The hand towel was folded the wrong way. Each thing was insignificant on its own, easy to dismiss. But they built up, slowly, almost daily. I bought small strips of masking tape and marked certain objects. Just to test myself, I taped a small line behind the kitchen drawer, one behind the bathroom cabinet. I even placed a coin upright on the windowsill. Within 3 days, every single marker was off, but the door was always locked. No signs of forced entry, no scratches, no loose latch. I even changed the lock, had it professionally reinstalled. Still, the shifts continued. I started taking pictures. Every night before bed, I'd photograph the living room and kitchen the way I left it. Couch, coffee table, counters. Then I'd compare them to the photos the next morning. Some mornings, the differences were so subtle I almost talked myself out of it. A throw pillow angled slightly inward, a spoon resting inside the sink instead of beside it. But one morning, the kitchen chair had moved by nearly 6 inches, pulled slightly back from the table, like someone had sat there or crouched beside it. I called the landlord, asked if anyone else had keys. He said no. Told me he'd lived on the property 20 years and never had an issue. He was polite, but dismissive. Told me maybe I was sleepwalking. I wasn't. I started staying up later, sleeping with my phone flashlight on, but no matter how alert I tried to stay, eventually I'd drift off, and the sense would return. That something wasn't quite mine anymore, that the air itself was being shared, because it wasn't just objects, it was a feeling, the kind you get when you know someone's standing behind you, even when there's no sound. I kept checking the window. The latch stayed locked, but the curtains had new folds in them, creases I didn't make. The silence started to feel inhabited, like the apartment had learned to breathe in sync with me. I started noticing it in the bathroom. At first, it was the shampoo. I kept 2 bottles on the ledge, one I used regularly and one I'd forgotten about months ago. A brand I didn't like. Too floral, too strong. But the bottles started getting lighter. I didn't use it. I hadn't touched it in weeks. But each week, it sank lower and lower. Not fast, just enough to notice. I tested it, weighed it on a kitchen scale, marked the side with a Sharpie. The next morning, the mark was lower. I live alone. I work from home. There's no one else. The toothbrush was next. It was wet one morning before I'd used it. I kept it in a plastic holder with a cover, closed, upright, dry. always dry. But that morning I picked it up and it was damp and smelled faintly of my own toothpaste. I checked the cap. It was twisted halfway. I told myself maybe the humidity in the bathroom had caused it. Maybe it was just leftover condensation, but that didn't explain the bristles or the fact that the tube felt squeezed in a way I didn't remember. I bought a second toothbrush, kept it in my bedroom drawer. The next day it was untouched, but the one in the bathroom, again, was damp. I stopped using that bathroom entirely for a few days, brushed my teeth in the kitchen, used dry shampoo. I wanted to see if anything changed. It didn't. When I returned to the bathroom, the lid of the shampoo bottle was open, slightly ajar, like someone had been using it and forgot to click it closed. I asked the landlord again. This time, more forcefully, I asked about previous tenants. He gave me vague answers, said the unit had been vacant for 6 months before I moved in, that the last tenant was a student who left abruptly. When I asked why, he hesitated, said something about family issues. The scent of that floral shampoo started showing up in strange places, on my pillow, on my towels, even my coat once, after I left it on the chair near the window overnight. I started wondering if I was losing it, if maybe I had some kind of disorder. But it wasn't just smell anymore. My laundry, washed and folded, was refolded, in different patterns. My underwear placed under shirts instead of on top, socks paired differently. At first, I thought maybe I'd just remembered it wrong. Then I found the receipt for the shampoo. It was dated from the week I moved in. I never bought that bottle. It was already in the apartment, and someone had continued using it. The air felt different at night. Not colder, but heavier. I started waking up in the early morning hours, not from dreams, but from stillness, like the room had paused around me, and someone was waiting for me to notice. I had a king-sized bed, even though I lived alone. Got it cheap from a friend who was moving. The extra space felt luxurious. I always slept on the left side. One morning I woke up with the comforter slightly pulled toward the right. Not bunched, not thrown, just gently tugged like someone had shifted their weight there. It was the first time I seriously considered that someone might be inside the apartment with me, not breaking in, living here. I checked the closet. Nothing. I checked the cabinets, the crawl space, even under the couch. Nothing, until I looked under the bed. At first, all I saw was dust, a few lost socks, and an old paperback. Then I saw the pillow. It was tucked against the far corner, under the frame. Not one of mine. Smaller, beige, worn. The kind you'd use for lumbar support, not sleeping. But it was warm. I reached for it, heart pounding. My fingers touched the fabric and it felt lived in, like it had been cradling something recently. I turned it over. On the underside, stitched into the seam, was my name. Not printed, not tagged, etched. In uneven thread, letters slanted, like someone had sewn it by hand, carefully, slowly. I backed out from under the bed and sat on the floor. I couldn't breathe. Someone had been sleeping there, beneath me, possibly for weeks, maybe longer. I called the police. They came, checked the apartment, found nothing, no signs of forced entry, no evidence of another person. I showed them the pillow. They bagged it, said it was unusual, suggested I change the locks again. I did. I also started locking the bedroom door at night. That first night I barely slept, but when I did, I woke to the feeling of air on my cheek. Not wind, not a draft, breath, close, measured, like someone lying on the other side of the door, waiting for me to open it. The next morning I found a folded napkin under the bed. I hadn't noticed it before. It had a single line written in ink. I stayed quiet because I didn't want to scare you. I moved out that day, packed what I could, left the rest behind. 2 months later I read an article, a niche psychology journal about interior cohabitation cases. Victims reporting missing food, damp objects, shifted habits. All consistent with the idea of someone living within the home, silently, manipulatively. The article described a case nearly identical to mine. and at the end it listed known behaviors, including this one: placing their scent on shared objects to simulate intimacy. I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found the pillow, if he'd waited long enough for me to trust the stillness, or miss it when it was gone. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. Story 3. The man who followed me without ever stepping closer. This happened in the spring of 2019 when I was attending grad school in Portland. I lived alone in a small studio near campus, the kind of place with laminate floors and a cracked stovetop, but good enough for someone on a student stipend. I walked everywhere. That's relevant. I didn't own a car, so everything I did, groceries, class, library, was on foot. There were only 3 consistent paths I took each week. I remember that clearly because they were simple, almost muscle memory. I didn't think when I walked, I just moved. The first time I saw him, I thought it was a coincidence. He was standing outside the 7-Eleven near my apartment, hands in his pockets, neutral face, not smiling, not watching me, just looking in the general direction of the crosswalk. He was tall, probably late 30s, wearing a blue beanie and a jacket that looked too warm for the weather. I walked past him and he didn't move. A week later, I saw him again. Different location. This time, I was coming out of the school library around 9:30 p.m. I'd stayed late working on a thesis proposal and was already jumpy from caffeine. I remember stepping outside and freezing at the top of the stairs. He was across the street, leaning on a light post. Same height, same posture. Just standing. He didn't approach me, didn't even look directly at me, but he didn't leave either. I took the long way home that night. By the 3rd time, I knew something was off. It was the grocery store, a small place I went every Sunday morning. I always arrived at the same time, always walked the same route. He was at the far end of the parking lot, standing between 2 parked cars, arms folded, not moving. When I looked directly at him, he didn't look away. He didn't do anything. He just stayed there. I remember feeling an odd kind of dread, not fear exactly, more like exposure, like something had been watching me long enough to memorize the gaps in my attention. I told a friend. She said I was being paranoid, that if he wasn't approaching or saying anything, maybe he was just some guy with a weird routine. But that's the thing about routines. They're usually yours. I started changing my paths, walking different streets, shifting times. It didn't matter. I'd look up and he'd be there, always within visible range, but never close enough to confront. I tried ignoring him, until the night I saw him outside my building. It was around 2 a.m. I couldn't sleep and had gone to fill a water bottle in the kitchen. My blinds were partially open, and there he was, not moving, not pacing, just standing on the opposite sidewalk. His face wasn't lit by the street lamp, but I could make out the silhouette. It was unmistakable, that stillness, that calculation. I didn't call the police. I don't know why. Maybe because nothing had technically happened. Maybe because deep down I knew they'd never find him, because he was never there long. By the time I pulled the blinds fully open, he was gone. But I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. The first email came with no subject line. It was from a throwaway account, a string of letters and numbers. I almost deleted it as spam until I saw the image attachment. It was a photo of me, taken from across the street walking toward my building. I was holding a grocery bag, glancing down at my phone. There was no caption, no message, just the photo. The second one came 2 days later, another photo. This time I was sitting outside a coffee shop near campus. The picture had been taken from an angle behind the window. You could see me laughing, one hand covering my mouth. I was talking to a classmate, someone I barely knew. Again, no words, just the image. They kept coming. Once every few days, always from a different email, always the same format, just a photo, always in public, always from a distance. What disturbed me wasn't the act of being followed. It was the precision, the curation. He was choosing images where I looked unaware, peaceful, unguarded. The kind of moments you'd only notice if you were watching for long stretches of time. There was one of me unlocking my front door. Another of me tying my shoe on the campus lawn. One of me crossing a bridge near the art building, the reflection of my face caught in the water. Each one made me feel smaller, like the world had shrunk into a lens I didn't control. I started wearing sunglasses even when it wasn't sunny, pulled my hoodie up, avoided looking at my phone while walking. It didn't help. I still got the emails, but then one of them changed. It came at 1:12 a.m. The image was the same format, public, distant, color slightly desaturated. But this time, I wasn't alone. I was sleeping. It was a photo of me lying on my couch, blanket pulled halfway up, face turned toward the window. The curtains were open. There were no lights on. The only illumination came from the TV glow, but the photo was taken from inside the room. I froze. I checked the locks, checked the windows. Everything was shut. Everything was where it should have been, except I hadn't fallen asleep with the blinds open. That's when I realized he wasn't watching me from outside anymore. He'd never needed to move toward me because he'd already found a way in. I moved out 2 weeks after the photo of me sleeping. No one ever saw him enter. No neighbor heard anything. The police reviewed my building's exterior cam and found nothing, no suspicious activity, no footage of anyone matching his description. They asked if I might have imagined the photo. I forwarded the email. They said it was inconclusive. I stayed with my cousin for a while. Didn't tell her why, just said I needed time away from campus. But the silence followed me. So did the presence. I started catching glimpses of him, not outside anymore, but inside reflections, not directly, just near. I'd be brushing my teeth and glance up, and there in the mirror, the hallway behind me looked wrong, the shadows slightly off, like someone had just stepped out of view. I'd turn. Nothing. Sometimes I'd wake up and feel like the air in the room had been disturbed, like someone had been standing too close. I kept checking the closet, the windows, the mirror. That mirror became a problem because I saw him there, often, but never fully. Once I thought I saw the outline of his shoulder just over mine. Another time, a partial face in the corner, just behind the bookshelf. But when I turned, it was only my scarf, folded oddly. Then it stopped. The emails, the glimpses, the presence, everything just stopped. No closure, no arrest, no name. I went weeks without incident, but the sense never left, because that kind of intrusion doesn't just stop when they disappear. It stays. It nests. One morning, I was getting ready for a presentation. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my collar. Nothing felt unusual until I blinked, and the reflection didn't, just for a second. A tiny lag, barely perceptible, but enough to know it wasn't me anymore. That someone else had been looking through my face, long enough to learn how to wear it, long enough to remain.